Okay, it looks like we're live. So hello and welcome everyone to Quin's fourth online webinar. And thank you all for joining. I'm Barry Rogers. I'm the VP of Product at Quin. Hopefully some of you have been using our diabetes self-management app and know a little about Quin's mission to open up the possibilities for life with diabetes. This is the fourth in a series of discussions Quin will be hosting on important subjects for people living with diabetes, from food and nutrition and diabetes decision-making to mental health and how to improve well-being and choice. We hope you find them informative and interesting, supportive and motivational, and most of all novel, as we don't shy away from difficult topics. We've received great feedback from our first 3 webinars, and if you haven't watched them yet, you can watch them all on our YouTube channel after this webinar finishes. Today, our topic is how to manage type 1 diabetes distress. We're going to dive into discussions to find out what diabetes distress is, how it can impact both blood sugar outcomes and your life, and tips on how to manage if you are experiencing any forms of distress. And so with us this evening, we have a wonderful, knowledgeable and experienced guest joining us from the West Coast of the US to share her thoughts and expertise with us. Beverly Thomassian is president and founder of Diabetes Education Services. She is a nurse entrepreneur, educator, and clinician with a passion to improve diabetes care. In 1998, this passion is what inspired her to found Diabetes Education Services. As a nurse, diabetes educator, and speaker for more than 20 years, Beverly has accumulated valuable knowledge about diabetes from around the US. So from her experience as an inpatient diabetes specialist at Stanford Hospital to setting up recognized outpatient diabetes programs, she not only understands the pathophysiology of diabetes, she understands the information healthcare professionals need to improve outcomes and quality of care. So welcome, Beverly, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Barry. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Cool. We're very glad to have you. So this webinar is an interactive webinar, so we're excited to have everyone watching join in the fun. Hopefully you should be able to see that we have an area for chat, questions and polls. Throughout the session, if you have any questions you would like Beverly to answer, please submit them and upvote any questions you would most like answered. We will have time for Q&A and try to get through as many questions as we can. We will also be holding some polls to get your opinions on a few subjects. And finally, a chat is available for you to share your thoughts, react, and engage with us and each other. So let's see some hellos in the chat there. And managing diabetes is obviously a very personal subject. And remember, it's okay for people to have different opinions. And in addition, we will be talking about sensitive topics today related to emotional distress. There may be discussion around ideas which may feel irrelevant or pointless to you personally, but may provide a lifeline to someone else watching. So let's try to keep the chat positive and supportive, avoid trolling and judgment so everyone can feel safe and supported. And hopefully we'll have positive takeaways for everyone watching today. So with all that said, Beverly, are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Cool, it's great. Let's dive in with an obvious first question. So Beverly, what is diabetes distress and how is it defined?
Well, that's a great question. And I just want to kind of start off with saying that most people with diabetes at some time will experience a degree of diabetes distress. It's expected and completely understandable. You know, diabetes isn't just about checking your blood sugars, counting carbs, giving insulin. There's a lot of emotions that need to be acknowledged around diabetes. So we want to really acknowledge emotions, give them room to breathe and say them out loud. So sometimes a person might feel great about a day when their blood sugars are on target, they're covering their carbs right, everything's going really great. And then the next day might be a complete mess due to a million different reasons, most of which are out of their control, and their blood sugars are just not on target at all. So when it all starts feeling like too much, like diabetes is driving you crazy, it's overwhelming, then that's when we might say a person is experiencing diabetes distress, when they just reach that point. And, you know, just distress can be experienced in different ways. And is it okay if I talk about the different types of distress?
Yeah, totally. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, there's emotional distress. So the thing I want to say about emotional distress is that each one of us has a relationship with our diabetes. So, you know, one day we're walking around a person without diabetes, and then the next day we're in the hospital, we have diabetes ketoacidosis, and we walk out on insulin, and we have this new condition that we weren't asking for, didn't expect, And here it is. And it's with us 24 hours a day. It can be a lot. So here you are, a person without diabetes. Now you're a person with diabetes. What does that mean for your life? And this emotional response to that diabetes is big. It's really big. And it can wax and wane over time. Like maybe when you're first diagnosed, you're overwhelmed and it's like so big. And how am I going to do this? And then you get in a roll with it and you're like, oh yeah, I got this. I can carb count and, give insulin. And I know how to adjust for exercise. And then you're doing it for a year and you're like, oh, this isn't going away. And it's kind of a big realization to say it's with me. And so each one of you have this emotional relationship to your diabetes. And I just want to give you all permission, whatever your emotional relationship is, to bring it to light, to talk about it, to be okay with it. It doesn't have to be this, perfect love relationship. It's complicated. It's a very complicated relationship. And, I don't have diabetes, but I do have chronic conditions that I live with every day. And I wake up and I'm like, are they gone today? And they're still there. So I totally get that. So that's emotional distress. And then there's something we call provider related distress, where, you're like, wow, the medical team I'm working with doesn't really get me. Or maybe you go to your visit and your A1C is 7.3 and you're so excited about this A1C of 7.3 and your provider's like, oh, got to get it below 7. And you're like, wait, I just brought it down from 9. And so this feeling can be really difficult one where we're like, I'm really working hard. The provider isn't recognizing me. Or if you live in a rural area, sometimes the providers may not be that familiar with diabetes. And you might go to the visit and they're like, wow, your blood sugars are high, but I'm not really sure what to do. And you could be like, wait, what? And I really want to say to each one of you has a great deal of expertise in your diabetes. So own that. You have a lot of you want to own your agency and say, my providers may know a lot about diabetes, but I know about my diabetes. So I really want to just give that a shout out right now. And then there's another kind of distress, interpersonal. And this is where like friends and family, they might really be trying to support you, but they might go something like this. Oh, you're going to eat that? Or, is that okay if you do that? And that can cause a lot of distress because here you are thinking, oh, I've got this under control. I know how to do my diabetes. And then people you love and care about are giving you this feedback that, well, maybe I'm not on track. Or, I've worked with a lot of people who say, well, my spouse doesn't want to hear about my diabetes and I have no one to talk to about it. So they're holding all of that in. Or they might say, well, my family just assumes I'm doing great. And I'm not. I'm really struggling with it. So that interpersonal distress is a big one too. And the last one I want to talk about is regimen related distress, where, man, I just want to just say to all of you, I was listening to this broadcast and they were saying there's 150 different things we need to do to manage our diabetes. I mean, it's so big. Monitoring our blood sugar. Is it going up? Is it going down? What are we going to eat? Are we going to eat in a half hour, 15 minutes? Should we pre-bolus? Or should I give half now and then give half later if I'm having a burger? What if I go out dancing? And then what if there's alcohol? Well, the holidays are coming. So all of these hundreds of micro decisions every day can be really overwhelming and cause a lot of distress. So this emotional relationship you have with your diabetes around these 4 different areas, they're not stagnant. They're going to change throughout your life. Give room for that too. Like sometimes you might feel like I'm in a groove, I'm doing well, things are going good. And you might get in this place where, oh man, I'm really stressed out with my diabetes. And that's the time we really want to reach out for help and support. So that's kind of the overview of diabetes distress.
Cool, thank you. That was a wonderful answer, and it's something we hear so often. We talk to so many people with diabetes at Quin, and frequently each of these various forms of distress are talked about by people that we interview and research with. It's such a prevalent topic in the mind of people with diabetes. And so, yeah, given that we now know a little bit more about what diabetes distress is, and a little about the impact it can have. How does the diabetes distress affect overall quality of life and blood sugar outcomes?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I was thinking about this a lot. How does it affect outcomes? And I think about this is that there's, like I mentioned, a lot of work associated with diabetes self-management. And we're using or walking away from that word diabetes control. Because the word control means, oh, you're 100% of the time in target range. And honestly, with diabetes, that's not possible because there's so many variables affecting your blood sugar at any given time. And your pancreas isn't working, right? So we're trying to imitate the work of a pancreas. But despite our best efforts to get our blood sugars on target, sometimes they're just too low, or they're above target or below target. And actually, I think about all the different work of diabetes as little pebbles we collect throughout the day. So let's just start with a person in the morning. And the first thing they do is they wake up and they check their blood sugar, and their blood sugar is elevated. So the first pebble they have of that day is an elevated blood sugar. And they're going to, have an emotional response to that. So not only is their blood sugar elevated and they need to recognize that, take action, give insulin, maybe what is that emotional response around that? Well, the emotional response might be, oh, I failed. Why can't I get my blood sugars down? I hate kicking off the morning with elevated blood sugar. Why can't I get this right? So this little blood sugar becomes much bigger. And so now this little pebble that weighed an ounce is now 5 pounds. We put it in our backpack, right? And then so we give the insulin, and then we're like, I'm not eating breakfast, and we go to work. So we're at work or at a team meeting, and all of a sudden it's starting to sweat. You're like, oh man, my blood sugar is dropping. And so you're trying to sneak out of the meeting, and then like, man, I'm going to get something from the vending machine. So you get a Pepsi or a soda or something, and then you drink that and you run back in. You're trying to act like nothing happened. Another pebble, another rock in your backpack, right? So now your backpack's getting heavy because not only is it you had to do a treatment, give some, soda, but you have the emotional feeling of, oh man, how come I can't get this right? Why is my blood sugar dropping? And then you go home and you're trying to, prepare a meal, and you're trying to, do all the things you need to do. And then you're like, I need to go for a walk. You're like, I'm so tired. I just can't go for a walk. It's another big rock that goes in your backpack. The rock now says, I didn't even exercise. Look at me. I can't do anything right. So now, and then the next rock that goes in is a perfection rock. It's a big gold shiny rock where you want to do everything right all the time. That's your expectation. That goes in your backpack. So to answer your question, Barry, so now your backpack's super heavy, right? And you're carrying this around with you. And that can lead to these feelings of distress. It can lead to just saying, forget it. I'm not trying anymore. I don't want to check my blood sugar. Why bother? It's not going to come down anyways. And it can really impact the quality of life. So what we want to do is make sure we're really thoughtful about what we put in our backpack. What we're going to put these little pebbles of tasks we have to do. But let's remember, when we check our blood sugar does not determine our value. Our blood sugar does not determine our success. It's information. It's information that tells us what is the next action I need to take. So if we can just start there with, really trying to take any judgment around our blood sugars and give ourselves a lot of grace, that's going to lighten up our backpack for the long haul and give us more endurance to manage this diabetes for the next day. We're just going to take it a day at a time.
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you, Beverly. It's another wonderful answer, and a really clear metaphor as well to how that sort of diabetes distress and our emotional weight can just literally sit on our back and sort of hold us down. So yeah, thank you again for that great answer. We're going to move to our first poll now quickly. So we've heard a little bit about what diabetes distress is and the various forms that it can appear in. So I've just published a question of which areas of diabetes distress are most important for you to keep to a minimum. And so we've expanded a little bit on what Beverly was talking about earlier. And so we have areas such as powerlessness and management distress, hyperglycemia distress or going low, negative social perception, where sort of just generally the world around us and their perception of diabetes is bringing somebody down as well. Eating distress, obviously a huge part of diabetes is around food. As Beverly mentioned, provider or physician distress, and also the relationships that Beverly was talking about, the friends and family distress. So please fill out your votes and pick those that you feel are most important for you personally, because it'll be interesting to see, as a community as a whole, what the breadth of opinion is like out there. And whilst you're doing that, we'll go on to our next question, Beverly. So how is diabetes distress identified in people with diabetes?
Well, it can show up in a lot of different ways. For example, a person may stop giving bolus insulin before meals. They may say, like, why bother? I'm just going to up my basal and just manage it that way. Maybe they don't wear their CGM for days at a time. They don't really want a documentation of what their blood sugars are doing, because they know their provider is going to see that. So they just kind of check out with that. Maybe they just, are really having trouble with their overall diabetes self-care on a daily basis, taking their insulin, checking blood sugars, I would say being connected with their diabetes. And then their A1C might elevate as a result of this, or they might be getting a lot of low blood sugars because they're not really carefully looking at their carbs, maybe over bolusing. So diabetes distress shows up in a lot of different ways. It can also be an emotional manifestation, where I see a lot of people are just mad. They'll come in and like, I hate this diabetes. I'm just so frustrated with it. Or maybe there's a sense of isolation where I'm just going to just check out. I don't want to deal with this. I'm not going to interact with other people. So anger, isolation, discouraged, even depression can be associated with this. And I want to say something really important. A lot of times people with type 1 think they're the only ones going through this. Like, other people are doing so much better than me. What's wrong with me? How come I can't seem to get my blood sugars under target? And the truth is, many people with type 1 diabetes are going through exactly the same thing you are, struggling with it on a day-to-day basis, having successes, having setbacks, moving forward. All of these things. So I really want to give a shout out to that. And as healthcare professionals, we need to, remind people about that. You're not alone. There's a whole community of people with type 1 diabetes out there. And I love this, platform where we can meet and we can share and we can connect with each other and realize we are not alone. And that's such an important message. So if you're feeling distress, and one thing that your healthcare provider can ask you is like, what is driving you most crazy about your diabetes right now? Or if your provider doesn't ask you that, you could tell them, be ready for your provider visits and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. I need help. And it's okay to be vulnerable and say where you need help, because your provider may not know. So, what I use a lot before I see my provider is I send them little notes. These are things I'd like to talk about during our visit. And why not? Because then they know where you're at. You really want to create a partnership with your provider. So, we want to know how you are doing with your diabetes. And sometimes, guys, I want to tell you the truth. Providers can be rushed. They might, be looking at their watch like, wow, I have 5 more minutes. What's going on? So we want to really establish a situation where if we're struggling emotionally, we want to bring that up early on in the visit so there's time. And then maybe, asking for assistance, a referral to a mental health specialist is always okay. It's a great idea because this is a lot to deal with. Let's remind everyone that getting type 1 diabetes is like getting a job you didn't ask for, right? It's this job, you don't get paid for it. You work 24 hours a day. Oh yeah, it's in addition to your other job of running your life. And what's the benefit of managing your type 1 diabetes? Well, nothing. You feel good, right? But you don't get a big bonus at the end of the year. So I just really want to recognize it's not easy. And every day we wake up, we just got to keep saying, all right, I'm just going to start with this one thing, this one little pebble, and I'm going to be kind and gentle to myself as I move through my day.
Cool. That's another fantastic answer. Thank you, Beverly. And I think just to double down on the sort of provider point there, that you're not working for them, they are working for you and there to look after you. So trying to make the most of that opportunity with them, it makes so much sense. And hopefully people out there are hearing that and have the confidence as they go forward to actually say what they want to get out of that next meeting that they are going to have.
Mm-hmm.
So wonderful. Let's take a quick look at some of the questions that are being put through on the Q&A. So I think just first off, neither of myself or Beverly, unfortunately, understand truly about what you're personally going through. And so whilst we can obviously provide a lot of advice here today, I think when there are specifics around your own individual treatments, whether that's insulins you're using or pumps you're using, it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to give a really useful answer to you there. So please do keep pumping in your questions and we'll sort of go through them in a bit. But there is a question here from Paul, who says, I've experienced distress from high and low blood sugars since I was diagnosed over 20 years ago, but now in recent years I've been experiencing massive mood swings with the slightest swing in blood sugars, which I've not experienced in my earlier years. Is this normal?
So what you're saying is that even though your blood sugars, okay, so you're saying maybe your blood sugars are improving, but you're still feeling massive mood swings when your blood sugars go up or down. You know, I haven't heard that in research, but it's true for you. And that's what really matters. If you notice when your blood sugars are in the 60s or 70s, you're really cranky, or we call it hangry, where you get hungry and angry. That's completely expected because our brain isn't getting enough glucose and we get pretty grouchy, and it's our brain telling us to get some food. And also when blood sugars are elevated, our body doesn't feel that good. We're not getting the energy we need to our muscles and our cells. And, our body's not functioning at the best place. So that elevation or drop in blood sugar can certainly affect our mood. And if we're looking at our CGM and we're seeing that blood sugar going up or down, we might also be getting feelings around, why is my blood sugar, going up and down right now? I've been doing such a good job managing it. So that might be also contributing to it. So I would just say for all of you, whatever feelings you have are valid for you. And just to share those, say them out loud. And, just by kind of voicing our feelings, I feel like it's very therapeutic because we need to be heard and recognized.
Cool. Wonderful. Hopefully, Paul, that is of some use to you there, because that's another wonderful answer from Beverly. There are some other great questions in the list there, but we're also going to cover some of those topics in the next 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to jump to our next question first. And if we haven't covered your question after we've been through our set of questions here, I'll come back round and pull those out again, and we'll see how much deeper we can go. So, Beverly, what is diabetes burnout and how does that relate to diabetes distress?
Yeah. So diabetes burnout is, I just want to read this. It's a state of someone with diabetes who grows tired of managing their condition, then simply ignores it for a period of time. And so sometimes I call this a diabetes vacation. And we might take a vacation for a weekend or a week or a long-term sabbatical. So it kind of just depends on what's going on. But the problem is with diabetes burnout is that we might not be attending to our diabetes, and it might really lead to some serious consequences as far as our blood sugar. So it really does require our attention. And it looks different for everyone. And I do want to say that diabetes burnout is a normal reaction to living with type 1 diabetes. As I mentioned earlier, it's a full-time gig for the rest of your life. And I mean, we all need a vacation. So I do talk to people saying, hey, I know you're really struggling, feeling burned out. Do you want to take a day off? And when I say take a day off, that means maybe giving yourself a little more latitude on your blood sugar. I had this gal, she went to San Francisco and she goes, I don't really want to worry about my blood sugar. I just wanted to keep it between 100 and 300. And I'm like, oh, I think that's really reasonable. So what we're trying to do here is not reach perfection. What we're trying to do is have the best life possible with our current situation on a daily basis. So I think that the burnout is when we're just taking a break, but we just want to kind of keep an eye on how long that break is. And we want to recognize that managing diabetes is a lot of work. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Cool. Wonderful. So I guess we've already started to hear some ways that you're starting to support people who are experiencing forms of diabetes distress or burnout. Have you got any other ways that you tend to support people experiencing this? And also, do you find that education and knowledge and maybe understanding of diabetes can help tackle or prevent diabetes distress?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because sometimes knowledge is helpful. I mean, it is helpful to learn how to manage, maybe to fine tune your insulin to carb ratios or your correction factors. I mean, that can be very helpful because sometimes they may not be set right, or sometimes your basal rates aren't set correctly, or you're not taking the right amount of insulin. And this can really throw off your whole diabetes management and make you feel really frustrated and just say, forget it. So that is really important. So knowledge is power. And sometimes I'll ask people, hey, can you look at your pump and tell me your, your insulin to carb ratio or what your basal rates? And they're like, oh, how do you find that? And then we kind of learn together, how do you find what your basal rates and your insulin to carb ratios? And then we write it down. And then I'll say, hey, do you know how to look at your reports? They're like, what reports? I'm like, oh, you can look at reports to see how your blood sugars are doing. And then they find out how to look at the reports and I'm like, wow, this is really helpful. And I go, yeah, let me help you, learn how to read these reports. And then we look at the reports and figure out what is time in range and where are the blood sugar patterns. And this sense of empowerment is amazing. And I think it can really help the knowledge too. So knowledge is power. And I think really for diabetes burnout, though, I see it as two things. I see it as a feeling of being burned out. Like, I'm just so tired of this diabetes. But then there's also a behavior. So what is the behavior? The behavior is, I'm feeling burned out. I'm tired of diabetes. I don't want to have this anymore. And so what happens then is your behavior changes. So you say, well, I'm not going to check my blood sugar as much, or I'm not going to give my insulin. So what I would say is maybe we can kind of separate the emotion from the behavior and say to ourselves, yeah, this diabetes is rough. I don't really like having it. I'm stuck with it. I'm not feeling really happy about having it right now. Totally recognize all of that. But then we'll say, you know what? But even though I feel all those things, I can still, check my blood sugars. I can still give my insulin. I could still cover for carbs. So figuring out, even when you're having those moments of burnout, what you're able to do and not expecting perfection. Maybe there's periods where you're just running, 100 to 300, and that's where you're at. And giving yourself room and grace to do that. And then when you're ready to come back and kind of tighten it down a little bit, then you come back. So, I just want to say that diabetes burnout, be ready for it. It's expected. It's okay. You want to early recognize the signs of it for you, because everybody's going to have different signs. You'll start feeling those grumblings and you'll be like, oh man, I'm heading to burnout. And you're like, I don't really want to deal with this diabetes. So then you're going to set yourself up. You're going to put a big safety net and recognize your emotions, give them permission, talk about them to somebody. And then you want to just say, hey, but for now, let's just keep managing our diabetes, doing the self-care basics to keep safe. And that's the thing you want to think about. I just want to keep safe. I want to keep my blood sugars, from going too high, or whatever language you want to use for yourself, in a very compassionate way. And so I just want to say a little bit more about this. And, sometimes I think what we think is like, if I ignore my diabetes for a while, if I pretend, I had this gal who said, I was just done with my diabetes. And so I just took I went on vacation. She took an actual vacation. She went to Costa Rica and she goes, I just ignored my diabetes for a week. And I go, oh, how did that work out for you? Well, she goes, I came back in DKA. I go, oh, okay. And then what? And then she goes, I realized it wasn't going to go away. And she had had diabetes for over a decade. So I want to say that's totally normal too, to think, well, maybe it will go away even after having it for many, many years. So we want to say that we want to consider separating the emotion from the behavior. Yes. And here's what you could say to yourself. Yes, I feel burned out, but I'm still going to check my blood sugar, give my insulin. And we need to recognize that the feelings of burnout are going to come in the future. Be ready for them, have a plan. And even though you feel frustrated and burned out, you're going to keep moving forward.
Cool. That's amazing. And again, I think that's another great insight there in splitting the difference between the behavior and the emotional sides of burnout. Because one is there to be experienced and lived through, which is kind of the emotional side. And the other is the one that can be planned for, as you say, that can be tackled. So, yeah, another fantastic insight from Beverly there. So let's go to our second poll quickly. And this one is going to look at, let's have a see. Do you feel that understanding more about diabetes and how it affects you would reduce your diabetes distress and improve your diabetes self-management? So yeah, if you could go along and just have a quick answer for us there, we'll start to see how, again, the community is viewing understanding more about diabetes, as Beverly has talked about. So let's move to our next question while people are answering the poll. So diabetes can involve a lot of unexpected outcomes, which can often contribute towards levels of distress. How do you coach people through approaching self-management with the understanding that it might not go as expected?
Yeah, so we're in this for the long haul, and it's a bumpy road. Sometimes the road is bumpy, and sometimes the road is really great. But here's some things I just really thought about. What are some strategies to deal with these feelings and to reckon, when we're feeling burned out or distressed, what can we do to get back into regulation? Because we might be entering like this dysregulation phase, and then we want to just try and move toward regulation. So here's a really important thing I want to say to all of you. It's not your fault that you have diabetes. It's nothing you've done wrong. You didn't bring it on yourself. It's this combination of genetics and environment. And it's not your fault. Your blood sugars aren't perfect. I just want to show you. I brought my friend with me. Here's a pancreas. This is what a pancreas normally looks like. It's not this big. It's about the size of two of your fingers. But this is all the beta cells that a person without diabetes has a luxury of having. But when you have diabetes, what happens to your beta cells? Well, they're gone. It's not your fault. So you eat food, your blood sugar goes up. If you have a functional pancreas, it makes all this insulin. Your pancreas can't do that. It looks like this. So you all are trying to imitate the work of a very sophisticated organ. It's not easy. I just really want to say that. It's not easy. So give ourselves grace, give ourselves room, give ourselves spaciousness when those blood sugars are not on target. And we'll just keep working on it and problem solving. So number one, it's not your fault. Number two, you can't control your blood sugars all the time. I think this is the most frustrating aspect. I'm doing everything right. Or people will tell me, Bev, I did the same thing yesterday and my blood sugars were great. And then today my blood sugars are wacky. What is up with that? Yeah, it's complicated. What is up with that? Well, our body pathophysiology is different every day. The hormones we release, the body temperature, what our stress levels are. Are we a little bit sick, or are we excited about something that can affect our blood sugars? What's the temperature outside? What's our activity level? I mean, there's 50 different things at any moment that affects our blood sugar. So you can't control your blood sugars all the time. And I think that's the hardest thing about diabetes, is that we can't control it 100%, but we can manage it. So that's the message of hope, that managing it means we try and get it right about 80% of the time. So this is a big ask for all of us, of letting go of that control of attaining perfection 100% of the time. But if we can do that just a little bit, it can really help us cope with when our blood sugars are not on target. So letting go of that perfection. So you can't control blood sugar, but you can take action. This is the great part. So you do have agency. Like you could say, oh, my blood sugars are, running low every morning. What could I do? Well, maybe I need to make some adjustments in my insulin delivery, or maybe I'm taking more than I need. So you have agency. Never forget that. You can talk to your provider and do some problem solving with them. Or you could say, every time after I eat carbs, my blood sugars go up. Okay, can we make adjustments? I had this one gal, she told me, Bev, I haven't eaten potatoes for 5 years. I'm like, why? She goes, every time I eat potatoes, my blood sugars go up. And I'm like, I think we can figure something out for that. I mean, let's do some experiments. You love potatoes. Let's get them back in your life. Get the potatoes back. Okay. Very important. Remember, I don't know why potatoes always get a bad rap. I don't know why. Remember, your blood sugars are not good or bad. Your blood sugars are not good or bad. They don't define you. They're just numbers that inform us of what action to take next. They're not good or bad. So when you get that number that's, below your target or above your target, there's usually a lot of emotion associated with those numbers. And, we want to really recognize the emotion that comes along with that and say, gosh, maybe I'm giving too much to this blood sugar number. I need to pull back a little bit and just recognize that it's giving me information. I'm going to take action based on that information. Really important. And even as a healthcare provider, like I used to look at people's logs and go, wow, those are so good, or what's going on here? And now I really say, wow, what is working for you? I see on this day, your blood sugars are on target range. What were you doing that day to get your blood sugars where they're at? And really focusing on the work that you do. Because just to give a shout out to all of you, this is a lot of work. And I hope your healthcare providers recognize the work that you're doing, because when you come in with information and to share, it's a big deal. Okay. Now, should I keep going, Barry?
Go for it. Keep going.
Okay. Number 4, listen to your self-talk. We all have a whole conversation that's going on in our head with ourselves. And I would say lots of times it's pretty easy to be critical. Now, what I would love for you all to do is just hear what you're saying to yourself and then say, if my best friend had type 1 diabetes and they had a low blood sugar, what would I say to them? Would I say, wow, again, you had low blood sugar? Or would you say, man, that must have been so hard for you. I'm so sorry. Do you want some help problem solving that? What do you think what do you think caused it? What can we do to help prevent that in the future? That was really scary, right? Because low blood sugars are really scary. And there's a lot of trauma that can come along with diabetes, low blood sugars. And I want to say that out loud. So what are we saying to ourselves? What if we go to a birthday party and we have a big piece of cake, more than we intended? We might say to ourselves, what? You ate all that cake? I can't believe you did that. What are you thinking? Look at your blood sugars now. But then if you said, what would I say to my best friend if they ate a piece of cake with diabetes? You would say, oh my gosh, you deserve that cake. You've been managing his diabetes for so long, you can have cake. So what happens a lot of times is when I'm talking to people with type 1, they'll eat the cake and not cover for it. And the reason they might not cover is because then they really didn't eat the cake. It's kind of this interesting thing where if you don't cover, you didn't actually eat it. So what I want to say to all of you, it's okay to eat whatever foods you feel like eating. Just cover for it, recognize it, acknowledge it. You don't have to feel bad or guilty. You don't have to hide it. It's all right. Cover the cake is my motto there. So listen to your voice and recognize your voice and see if you can be a more kind, gentler version. Self-compassion is a big deal with type 1 diabetes. Okay. And I'll say another thing, I'll take a break, but diabetes is not about perfection. I've talked about that, but we want to really think about small baby steps. Like what if your A1C is 12% and you're like, oh my gosh, my A1C is 12. I've got to eat right and exercise and I'm going to do this new regimen. And you want to do all these things. It's too big. You just want to start with one baby step. And here's the one baby step you might choose. I am going to take my bolus insulin 15 minutes before meals. And you just start there. I want all of you, when you're making goals for yourself, to make a goal that is so ridiculously easy to accomplish, you are going to have success. Because when we make our goals so big and we don't succeed, we feel like failures. So make your goals tiny so you can succeed. And then you feel like, wow, I got this. And then you make another goal and then you succeed at that. And that is one of the most important pathways to managing this condition for the long haul.
Cool.
All right,
Wonderful.
I'm going
Okay.
to come up for air, Barry.
Yeah, I know everyone can see me sitting here nodding along, but that is completely replicated in the chat as well. We've had some wonderful messages already about you helping people feel validated, and it not being about the numbers, and people really trying to live as you are trying to say, and maybe not having it acknowledged by other providers previously. We've even had a wonderful message with someone wishing that you were their healthcare practitioner as well, which I'm sure was actually, yeah, quite a few people there might wish for that at the moment. And so, yeah, maybe we should go on to just our final question and kind of building on exactly what you're talking about there is, do you have any helpful exercises or techniques or tips that you can share with people who are experiencing diabetes distress at the moment?
Yeah, I would just say take breaks from your diabetes. And when I mean take a break, I mean maybe just for an hour. I'm not going to think about my diabetes. I'm going to go outside. Maybe you have a hobby. Maybe you're part of a club or an organization where you are volunteering. Just little breaks where you get some mind space away from the diabetes is so important because we want to rejuvenate and have the energy to keep going forward with this. The other thing is talking to friends and family. And this is so important, but it needs to be someone who will listen to you. I mean, if you're telling somebody, I'm really struggling with my diabetes, I keep getting lows, and they say, oh, you'll be fine. You've had this for 10 years. That's not the person you want to talk to. You want to talk to somebody who says, man, I'm here to listen. Let's talk about this. The other thing is maybe considering, as I mentioned earlier, getting counseling, because managing all these aspects of diabetes can be really big. So kind of seeing, is that something that would be helpful for you? The other thing is nourishing our bodies. Now, when I talk about eating food, I'm not saying avoid certain foods with diabetes, but I do want to say we want to keep our body in a state of nourishment. And that means, making sure we get enough, water and vegetables and fruits and fiber, because that helps decrease our overall body inflammation and just makes us feel better. Getting enough sleep. A lot of us, maybe are cheating ourselves on sleep. And when we don't get enough sleep, it makes it so much harder to cope with the rest of our day. So really committing to sleep, 7 to 8 hours a night. 7 would be great. I know that's hard, but it's such an important part of our life. You might want to consider meditation. And the other thing I say is go out and have an oxygen cocktail. What is that? Well, we go outside and take that deep breath. And while we're having that oxygen cocktail, you might even experience a moment of awe. Like we look outside and we see a beautiful tree, or we hear a bird, or we look at the blue sky and we're just like grateful for that moment. Believe it or not, those little moments of awe and connecting to nature really decrease our cortisol and help us manage stress. It's a little thing that goes a long way. Now, the other thing is reminding yourself of all the work you are doing to manage your diabetes. It's so easy to be critical and say, I should be doing this and that and this and that. But really, I want you all to take inventory and really, just write a note to yourself. Look at all the things I'm doing to manage my diabetes and celebrate that. So, as a diabetes nurse, we're really working on as healthcare professionals to do a strength-based approach to say, look at what all you're doing right. This is amazing. And maybe it's not 100% of the time, but it's 80% of the time. And that's terrific. So, and for all of you too, to take inventory of everything you're doing right. And remember, you are not alone. So I want to just make some suggestions on way to connect to others with diabetes and diabetes camps. Especially for younger kids, is so amazing to connect with others, hear their stories. The other thing is social media groups. Social media groups that are kind of closed or people come in and it's kind of monitored is really helpful to connect with people, hear their stories, get information, share information. Diabetes apps are so powerful to help people manage their diabetes on a daily basis. And they're so user friendly now, and we can have them on our phone and really keep connected that way. And I just want to remind you, you are resilient. You are not your blood sugars. You've got this. And just remember baby steps. And that's what I like to say.
Cool. Wonderful. So thank you so much for answering all of my questions. I think what we'll do next is we'll have a quick look at the two user polls that we populated earlier, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. There are some great questions in there, but if you do have a question that you would like answered before we drop off here in about 15 minutes time, please do put your question in now so we can take a look at it and see if we can get it answered. So if we go back to our first question, which was, which areas of diabetes distress are most important for you to keep to a minimum? I think, as expected, there is a wide array of selection of answers here. And what we've started to see is that actually management distress and powerlessness is starting to drift to the top there. And again, I think this is something that I've personally seen a lot of people that I've talked to with diabetes, that inability to control everything and the feelings of powerlessness do come out very, very frequently. But we can also see here that eating distress and hypoglycemia distress follow quite quickly along, and then negative social perception sort of follows that. Quite thankfully, physician distress is actually at the bottom here, which is a great representation for sort of the UK and US and whoever else is watching the providers in those countries. So that's a really interesting poll result there. And if we move on to the second poll question, we've got, do you feel that understanding more about diabetes and how it affects you would reduce your diabetes distress and improve your diabetes self-management? Quite a popular answer here is yes, definitely. So we've got over 42% of people actually answering that, which is, again, I think as Beverly mentioned, there is power in knowledge, and understanding more about diabetes can definitely help. And again, the second most popular is also help in some areas. So it's good to see that. I think that's really 70% of people there looking towards understanding more about diabetes will actually make them feel more confident and hopefully reduce diabetes distress. But let's go to the Q&A now. And so first up, we've got a question which hopefully we've answered around what can we do to remedy it, and Beverly's given two fantastic responses to some of our questions. But a follow-on question from that is, if we start to feel negative, what can we do to prevent negative feelings going further and lasting longer?
Yeah, I mean, it's reasonable to feel negative or discouraged. So I just want to say to give room for that negative feeling, to let it be and acknowledge it. And then you might want to even talk to that negative feeling and go, oh man, you're feeling so angry right now. What is that all about? And then maybe if you talk to that negative feeling, it will tell you what it's all about. Well, I'm just feeling so powerless, right, over my diabetes. Okay, well, what could you do about that powerlessness? Well, I don't know, my blood sugars are always going high at night. Okay, how could you help fix that? So I don't know, I went into problem solving mode, but really what I want to say is recognize the negative feeling. It's okay. But if it's causing you distress, maybe you can ask it, what do we need to do here to move past this? How do we, because you probably don't want to hang out in this negative place, right? You want to move to a different place. So we'll have a conversation with it and see how you can problem solve together. And maybe that will be helpful. And also to talk to somebody else about your negative feelings and just give yourself permission to feel that is really the most important thing I want to say.
Cool, thank you very much. And given that we're running low on time, I'm going to try and run through to the next question. And so when I speak to my DSN, she seems to be more interested in numbers, but I want to talk more about the mental health aspect of managing. Is there something we should expect from diabetes nurses?
Wow, such a great question. So I think what Barry said is so important is that you set the agenda when you go to your provider. So if you go to your DSN and she or he is looking at your numbers like, wow, just looking at that and not connecting with you on an emotional level, maybe you could just say, hey, at the beginning, before I show you my numbers, I really want to talk about my emotions around my diabetes or these feelings I'm struggling with, or set the agenda for yourself. You have the power to do that. And I think that will be really informative to the DSN too, to recognize that, yeah, these emotions are really important and we need to take a moment to let them be and talk about them. I just want to say something about providers. Sometimes providers get a little bit nervous about going into the emotional thing because they think they have to fix it and they don't feel like maybe they know how to fix it. So that's kind of a fear that many providers have. So I just want to let you all know that. So you could even say, hey, you don't need to fix this, but I'm really struggling with this. And maybe that will help open a conversation.
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you again. Next question is, my biggest issue with T1D is weight management. Would there be any advice? And so there's a follow-on bit of text as well. So I've not had a healthy relationship with food before the diagnosis, but I feel like I will drown now as I know I am gaining weight every day and I'm eating even less now. And so obviously there is some personal information here that we are obviously missing, but I guess overall around eating distressed, Beverly, maybe you can give some advice and tips.
Yeah, eating is very emotional, especially with type 1 diabetes. There's a lot of emotional energy around food. So, really to recognize that. And then there's a lot of emotional energy around weight. So, I would really suggest to meet with a dietitian and talk to your healthcare team because sometimes when people are receiving more insulin than they need, sometimes that can lead to weight gain. So you might want to talk to your team and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this weight issue. Is there any way that we can look at my insulin and see if we can make any adjustments? And sometimes there's other interventions that they can provide too. So I would just have a really honest conversation because you're right. If you're really worried about your weight, then you might get into this food restrictive behavior and not, be eating enough calories. And that can be an issue too. So you want to have a healthy relationship with food while trying to maintain your blood sugars and your weight. So yeah, I would just bring it up, have conversations, and seek help on that from your dietitians, your diabetes nurse, and your provider.
Cool. Wonderful. So yes, again, hopefully that helps there. And so I am looking through a lot of the other questions in chat, and there is obviously a lot of information here around very specific topics such as placement of sensors and sort of managing exercise. There's a lot of tips on bolus ratios and also, good control. It just seems to go down. Again, pump handsets, Omnipod. So there's clearly quite a lot of information that people are missing out there. Is there any advice you have for people more generally here who are looking for answers to some both very specific and a bit more general questions? Is there people that you'd recommend reaching out to there, Beverly?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I just want to say for this, Google is a great place to go because there's a lot of YouTube videos on how, about pumps and insertion sites and basal bolus adjustments. There's a lot of information out there right now in the universe. Specific, like your questions that you're typing in here, I'm seeing some of them. You could certainly look out there, especially going to the companies that you're working with and looking for videos that are based with companies and they have specific information that's really reliable is important. And then also diabetes communities. So finding diabetes communities on social media through apps is really helpful too, because people in diabetes communities, closed communities that are sharing information, have a wealth of resources. So they're really great people to ask and say, hey, how do you do this? Or what do you do here? And you will really find a lot of assistance in that. And of course, talking to your provider is always a great idea too.
Yeah, and I think that's already been replicated in the chat with someone echoing that and saying YouTube has been super helpful to them as well. Mm-hmm. But we are slowly running out of time here, Beverly. So do you have any final thoughts on what we've covered today?
I just want to say that, the holidays are coming up and the new year, and it can be a big time, going to parties and celebrations and kind of navigating food and alcohol and blood sugars and all of that. So give yourself a lot of room to enjoy this time of year. And remember that this time of year, during these celebration times can be stressful too. So giving yourself a little extra space for that. And I just really want to recognize your resilience. Living with type 1 is not easy, and you've had to overcome many hurdles. Maybe you've heard scary stories about what will happen with type 1 diabetes. And the truth is most people with type 1 don't get complications. So, you're on a path. The fact that you've joined this and you're listening to this podcast or video cast is so amazing, because I know right now about you that you are involved in your diabetes care, that you want to learn more information, that you're an active self-advocate So I just really want to give a shout out to all of you for being here, asking questions, participating, and wanting to learn more about your type 1 diabetes.
Cool. Wonderful. So thank you so much, Beverly, for a really insightful and thoughtful session. You can follow Beverly on Twitter and Instagram at CDCES Coach, and visit the Diabetes Education Service website at diabetesed.net. So could we have some appreciation in the chat for Beverly for sharing her time with us, and her has been absolutely amazing today.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for being such a great host and asking such excellent questions. That was awesome.
Cool. Thank you. I think that's the first time someone said that and recognized me. So thank you so much, Beverly. If you want to find out more about Quin or share your thoughts on today's session, you can share with @Quin Diabetes App on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. If you haven't seen some of the recent TikTok and Reels that Charlie has been posting, please do check them out. They're both funny and informative and really relatable. And yeah, thousands of people are checking them out. You can also go to quintech.io for more details about Quin and the app, and sign up for our newsletter. If you're in the UK or the US, you can download Quin for iOS from the Apple App Store now. Search for Quin Diabetes Management. We are not yet available on Android, unfortunately. We do have plans to do that. And we designed Quin for you. So if you have any thoughts or ideas on what we can improve, please do let us know. We've worked with hundreds of people with diabetes in designing Quin so far, and we would love to get that number even higher. So thank you all for watching. Thanks so much again to Beverly for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your days, and please download the Quin app if you can. But yeah, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.